we are here to discuss about a very important topic, and I take the opportunity to thank all the nurses, the backbone of critical care in current scenario. Because why I am emphasizing current scenario, because the people, the other fraternities, they started recognizing critical care at the first instance, and then the role of nurses followed by the doctors to a great extent during this COVID pandemic. So definitely a big round of applause to all the nurses, our dear colleagues who are working relentlessly day and night to save the lives of so many critically ill patients. Second thing, what I want to highlight here before entering into the topic proper, that we are all in a team, and the team effort finally pay to the what is our utmost satisfaction that the patient recovers and finally gets discharged from the hospital. But to make the things easier, we have to do simple and basic things properly and in a very systematic manner. And again, the COVID pandemic has also taught us and also confirmed us. My dear colleague also will agree with that, that it's not like the techno savvy procedures or the medicines, the high price tag medicines that will save the life. Rather, in COVID pandemic also, with the seriously ill patients also, if we do general basic critical care in a very systematic way, in a very team approach, then definitely most of the lives, we cannot save everybody, but definitely most of the lives will be saved. And the third part, what I want to highlight here, we are not typical the persons who will deal with starting from head to toe examination, because my topic title is initial assessment, or the assessment, bedside assessment of critical ill patients, and let's make it super easy. So it's not about examining from head to toe and we have a half an hour or 1 hour or 2 hour time to finish this examination. No, we are dealing with acute medicine where every minute is actually very precious, and time is tissue, time is life. So we need to finish everything within a short span of time, so that the procedures, the interventions will take place after our assessment and our examination. And that for that reason, we need to know everything, but yes, we need to finish it also within shortest possible time. So that's also our third point. So I will start with the presentation with a slide where we can keep ourselves in that place. Should this be our patient care? So all the nurses, all the doctors, we are all colleagues. So this also applies to us. When we enter into the ICU cubicle or ICU unit, and the patient just looking at you or me jumps out of the bed, do we want this type of healthcare worker? Definitely not. Definitely this is not our ambition, and this is not our what we get satisfaction doing hard work in the critical care unit. Rather, we want ourselves to place in this type of position where the person, the patient, the family relatives just looking at you, they feel so much secured, and the assurance level is so high that the smile on their face will say everything, rather than any other good words or appreciation we are actually needing from them. So that should be our approach, and that should be our final goal while we are working in the critical care unit. So how to make this happen? So for that reason, we selected this topic, and we thought maybe this will be one topic that should be we all practice in our respective ICUs and in our hospitals in a better way. We know most of the things. I am not here to tell about the things that are very new. It's all simple things, but yes, maybe after this presentation we can recollect it while we are at the bedside in a better way. So the first point I want to highlight, that we need to know the correct sequence of priorities in assessing any critical ill patient in our ICU. So that should be we cannot be haphazard in us addressing the issues. So we need to know which are my priorities in hand, and what should be the number one, what should be the number 2, and what should be the number 3. Then only I should act to correct the number 1 thing first, and then I will move to number 2. Maybe the things can be also that I can do so many things at one point of time. Like 1 also I will be having one eye, and 2 also I can also simultaneously think about. But it has to be a systematic approach, and I should know what I have to do. So that is the first point. Second point, why it is important to have a systematic approach? Why, like if somebody will say that heart is the most important thing for me, he or she may be right, but for me, maybe I will start with airway. So we'll discuss in all these things in detail, but that can be also one of the approach, but it has to be rationalized. That means what I am doing, there should be a proper explanation, and there should be a proper rationale why I am doing the A1, then A2, and then A3. Third point, we need to know so many clinical situations when the patient's condition may become jeopardized or compromised. So we need to know, that's the reason why we want to work in a busy ICU. And I was lucky to work in most of the centers in India as well abroad, where the patient load is so vast, was so vast, that you get to know most of the cases, and that will come wherever you go. Not maybe in one city, if you move to the other city also, the patients will be more or less in the similar line only. So that's the third point, to know the clinical situations where you can face problems. The fourth point, we need to have, or you need to demonstrate safe as well as effective assessment as well as care of the critically ill patient using a systematic approach. So we also will formulate, maybe at the end of this discussion, we can have a systematic approach or formula how to deal with this type of patients in shortest possible of time. We can finish our assessment and move on to our intervention part or the treatment part. Now, what are the key stages of recognition and treatment of a critically ill patient? If somebody will ask me, I have to first answer that if your mind doesn't know, your eyes cannot see. So that thing actually is applicable to critical care to a great extent. That means if I know that the patient in front of me is actually having acute emergency, and the patient is right now giving me some time, so if I start acting in those precious moments, maybe the patient will not go into deeper problems. So the first point is, I have to understand that there is an emergency, and I have to be really alert. My reflexes have to be sharp, and I need to be total press those alarm buttons or the red flag signs. This is the first and foremost thing. Then only I will move to the second point, that is identify and prioritize your problems. So that already I have discussed. I need to know, I need to identify, and also prioritize which is 1, which is 2, which is 3. Third point, I have to act, and then I have to react. That means I have to evaluate also depending upon what I have done. So this is like action and reaction, or action and evaluation. These two things also should go simultaneously or in tandem. So these are the 3 key stages of recognition and treatment. So then only we'll get to know the assessment process. So now, what are the principles behind bedside assessment in a critically ill patient? First, use a systematic approach. And the systematic approach, very easy to remember for the nurses as well as the doctors also. I still believe in A, B, C, D, E. Very easy to remember: airway, breathing, circulation, disability, exposure. We'll discuss all these things in detail. This is the first formula I am right now sharing with all of you. Second point, undertake a complete initial assessment. So the initial assessment has to be thorough. There should not be any shortcut, because if the patient is coming for the first time to the ICU, and I am the bedside nurse who is right now taking over from the emergency nurse or the patient coming from the ward, so I am taking over from the ward nurse. So my initial assessment has to be complete and thorough. Then after, maybe if your shift is over and the other nurse or doctor is coming, then it has to be again reassessed. So the reassessment process is a regular, and it has to be in like at regular intervals. So that is also a different thing. So that assessment is also we need to do. But yes, the formula or the approach is little bit different than the initial first hand impression or assessment. So that we need to understand. Now, third point, always what you do, you have to see the response. It's not I have done all those things, the checklist I have completed and my job is over. No, whatever you do, there has to be some reaction or some response from the body, from the patient. So that I need to know. Maybe what I am doing, it is going in the opposite direction. That means the patient is not showing improvement. Rather, if I am doing this procedure, the patient is deteriorating further. Simple examination or simple thing what I share with the other, all the attendees here. The patient is actually fluid overload, and the fluid what I am trying to give, because the patient is having hypotension, it is really creating more problem for me. That means the patient is not responding to the fluid. Maybe the fluid is the toxic effects right now that is actually expressing in the patient. So my what, like, no, if so, we all know patient coming from the emergency department with hypotension, the first thing what we do, start fluid. But it's not always beneficial to all the patients. So one size doesn't fit all. So that I want to highlight in the third point. Now, fourth point, always correct life-threatening abnormalities first before moving on to the next part of assessment. That means what I am sharing with you, it is not like God's sent words that always doctor has already like told us the formula that we always should start from airway, then breathing, then circulation. No, it can be changed depending upon the life-threatening abnormalities. If my patient is bleeding from the long bones, he's a trauma patient, just had one accident outside maybe 10 minutes before, he's bleeding profusely from the right lower leg, and I am right now, and he's completely conscious, there is no other problem from the airway side, breathing side, or some like no CNS side, I should focus more on the part that I should actually completely stop the bleeding from the bone. So that is my priority, number one. Then maybe I will start with airway, breathing, circulation. And circulation here may be the first priority for me rather than the airway and breathing. So that I want to highlight here. Because if I am not stopping the bleeding part or the circulation part, maybe after some time the patient will start like having hypotension, and then the general consciousness level will dip, and finally the AB will be affected. So that I want to highlight here. So the nurses, they should know what are the things, life-threatening problems in front of themselves. Now, fifth thing, recognize the circumstances when you need additional help. Believe me, this applies to us also. Sometimes we feel that I am a master of all trades. No. Better if I think I am unable to actually secure the airway. American Association of Anesthesiology, Indian Society of Anesthesiology, like all these like anesthesiology societies, they say 2 attempts are maximum you can spare for like securing the airway. If you are feeling that you are feeling some, or you are having some difficulty, or you are not able to protect the airway with whatever skills you are having, better to ask for help early rather than you are completely in like those situations where if somebody is also coming, they are not able to help you, or the situation is so irreversible in front of you, maybe you cannot save the patient's lives, or you will lose the airway after so many traumatic attempts. So this is one example I want to share, and the reason why I have highlighted the fifth point, that early the better. So if you think that I need someone else also when the patient is dipping or crashing, better to call at the earliest. And then sixth point, use all members of the multidisciplinary team. That means it's a ICU is a team effort. So there is a doctor, there is a nurse, there is a pharmacist, there is a dietitian, there is a social worker. So many persons are there in the team, and everybody has their assigned job or responsibilities. So we need to explore them, and also we need to explore their responsibilities rather than doing everything and finally not arriving at the conclusion or arriving at the final what we are expecting. 7th point, communicate effectively. It's the final thing, communication, communication, communication. Because if you are not doing it properly, then in the current situation, we are all creating problem for ourselves. We all know the importance of communication. Next point is, we need to sometimes do some initial intervention that is named as holding measure. That means I need to first keep the patient alive, and then maybe I will call the surgeon, or I will call the radiologist, or I will call some intervention person who can do some definitive treatment later on. So those are the things we need to also understand and know, that I need to do something that can immediately save my patient's life. That is the 8th point. At the bedside, we need to know these things so that the patient's life can be saved. 9th point, remember, if you do some procedures or some resuscitative measures, you need not wait for 1 hour or 2 hours to assess the response. You have to do something so that within 15 to 30 minutes, maybe the response has to be seen, or that can be actually, we can actually feel the patient is improving. That means if the patient is having severe hypotension and fluid deficit is the reason. So if you are giving fluid, don't wait for 4 hours or 6 hours, then you will assess for the second time that the patient is improving or not. So if the patient is severely fluid depleted, maybe within half an hour to 1 hour after starting fluid or giving fluid bolus, the patient will start responding. The peripheries will be starting to have warm pulsations, and the patients you can see the patient is actually responding well. So these are the things which we need to understand, and then maybe these are the basic things or protocols that we need to remember always when we are working in the high voltage area of critical care. Then, before going into further, I want to highlight few things. As a bedside nurse, you are there most of the time in the critical care unit beside the patient's bed. So, first, do no harm. This is the first and foremost principle. We all know the significance of that. Whatever is happened, happened. But we cannot do further harm to the patient. That means, at least if we are not doing anything good to the patient, maybe we should not do anything that is actually harmful to the patient, or that is causing more harm to the patient. Then, what is the importance or roles of critical care nurse? If somebody will ask me, in India, the situation, the perceptions of nursing is also changing in last 10 years. If I will be very honest with you, before, the doctors, the other the person, the management, they just see the nurses to be just at the bedside, keeping the monitoring, doing all these vital charting, then starting IV fluids, giving the antibiotics, and that's it. But for me, as the society is changing, and maybe the COVID pandemic that has actually changed or resurfaced all those ideas again, that along with the therapeutic part, which is one of the responsibilities of the nurse, we have also responsibilities in the form of diagnostic, in the form of administrative, in the form of quality and safety, in the form of ethical and medical legal, and also social. So we are master of all trades, and I will label you as the level 1 healthcare worker. Maybe the doctor will be level 2 healthcare worker, because we are not doing most of the things at the bedside. So that is also one of the things we need to understand, and that creates more responsible when we are doing all those immediate or acute interventions. Now, let's come to the topic proper. Assessment of critically ill. Believe me, these are the things which, if you understand, if you do it properly, then there is nothing called like you will miss a single things in your bedside assessment. So I am trying to share all those key or all those secrets with all of you. So that's the reason why I have kept the topic name, let's make it super easy, or maybe ridiculously easy. So these will be the terms or sentences what I can share with all of you. So we can divide the initial assessment part into two things. Maybe the initial assessment or the emergency assessment. That is the first one. I have already described when you are receiving the patient in the emergency department or in the critical care unit for the first time. So what are your primary concerns? That is point number one. And the second assessment will be when the same nurse on the second day is coming for a fresh duty and he or she is receiving the same patient again. The patient was admitted on Monday. Now you are coming on Tuesday morning. And now how will you assess the patient? So these are the two things that will happen. And these are the two possibilities. So we'll describe one by one. Now, Dr. Saurabh, please.
So what we have done is we have included around 5-6 multiple choice questions in between so that you are attentive and you can tell us the answers in the chat and we can make it more interactive. So the first question is, what is the correct sequence of initial assessment? CADBE, ABCDE, ABDCE, or BACDE, where A is airway, B is breathing, C is circulation, D is disability, and E is exposure or environmental control. So can you put all your answers in the chat box? I'll give you 20 seconds for the same. I like everybody to participate. Dr. Tapas has already leaked the answer. So he mentioned the correct sequence in one of the earlier slides. So this was to check your attentiveness. Some more answers, please. So quite a few of you have answered. So the correct sequence is A, B, C, D, E. So first is airway, second is breathing, third is circulation, fourth is disability, and E is exposure. And the mnemonic is very easy. The choice B is correct, A, B, C, D, E. So Dr. Tapas will be taking all of these in details. Yeah, over to you, Dr. Tapas.
Thank you, Dr. Saurabh. So the initial assessment, the formula we are right now here, we have to remember it's very simple, A, B, C, D, E. And here in the initial part, the answer is itself in the next slide. That is, this is the approach we need to understand. So airway, breathing, circulation, and D is for disability. Disability is mainly aimed at neurologic evaluation. That means for the brain part, we need to understand the concept, what we have to actually monitor, what we need to assess, so that the D part is fulfilled. Then E part, the full form is expose and or environmental control. That means we need to expose the patient as we do in the trauma patient, the primary survey, the secondary survey, and also simultaneously we need to take care of the environmental control. That means the hypothermia part or the hyperthermia part we need to take care. So that is the E part. So very easy to remember, and we'll discuss one by one in detail. Airway. Airway is the most important thing. Why? Because airway obstruction is the medical emergency and we need to obtain expert help immediately, because if you are missing few precious moments, maybe after that the patient will end up in difficult ventilation, difficult intubation situation, and finally the hypoxic brain injury will happen. So that we do not want. So untreated airway obstruction, if you are unable to identify this problem and the patient is landing to low PaO2 or the oxygenation is very poor, that will risk damage due to hypoxia to major organs in the body like the brain, kidney, heart, and that will finally land in the cardiac arrest, maybe even death. So that's the reason airway has always been given the first and foremost importance in our assessment. If airway is important, maybe we'll go ahead with the breathing part. Now in the airway, what are the things you should look when you are at the bedside? First, look for the signs of airway obstruction. Most of the time, the patient will not say that he or she is having some airway problem. So if you are at the bedside, you are looking at the patient maybe for 15 to 30 seconds, and you can easily observe that the patient is using accessory muscles of respiration to breathe properly. There is actually, if you look at the fingers, the tip of the fingers, and you find that peripheral cyanosis has developed, maybe that is a later stage. Central cyanosis, if you look at the tongue, tip of the tongue or the mucosal surfaces, and you find that there is dark, like discoloration or black color discoloration is already happened, that means already airway obstruction has progressed to a maybe advanced stage. So central cyanosis is a late sign of airway obstruction, and we do not want the central cyanosis to develop. That means our assessment has failed. Maybe we could not recognize the early signs of airway obstruction. That we need not right now here afford. We have to address the airway obstruction features at the very early instance. And finally, simultaneously in the airway obstruction also, if the patient is able to actually vocalize, or the patient is able to maintain the airway and talking to you in a very proper way, that will clear most of the signs of airway obstruction. That means the GCS or the cerebral perfusion pressure is very good. So indirectly, if the patient is active, alert, talking to you in a very sensible way, that means most probably the airway obstruction is not there. But you have to look at the other signs and symptoms. Now, in the airway, check the first and foremost thing before looking at the neck and the breathing part or the airway part. Check the patient's GCS, Glasgow Coma Scale. If the patient is awake, talk to the patient just for 5 to 10 seconds. If you are talking to the patient and the patient is responding to you in a very nice manner, most of the problems are not right now the patient has actually faced. Second point, if you are still having problem, provide high concentration of oxygen with whatever measures you are having, maybe nasal prong, maybe face mask, maybe high flow, the breathing non-breathing mask, maybe HFNC, whatever you are having. Look for obvious injury and obstruction. You have to look at the patient. Maybe during the your initial assessment, look at the nose, the nostril, the mouth cavity, the neck part, that you have to see. Check pulse oximetry. You will get a rough idea that the oxygenation is actually getting hampered, or there is some problem. Check or clear the airway with a suction device if needed. We all do these things. I am not actually right now telling something which is out of our scope, and is it something new guideline has come. But yes, we have to be systematic. For that reason, we have kept all these things in a very you can say a standardized manner. Then next point, anticipate use of advanced airway or adjunct. You can see here the adjunct what I have kept here: oral airway, nasal airway, and you can see the pulse oximeter here. Now coming to the breathing part or B part. During the immediate assessment of breathing, try to diagnose and treat immediately life-threatening conditions. I have also written in one of the underlying principles in the slide 9 points I have highlighted. In that, you have to look at the life-threatening conditions first before going into the less life-threatening. So those life-threatening conditions from the breathing part: acute severe asthma or asthma exacerbation. Second point, pulmonary edema, frank pulmonary edema where the oxygenation is a very serious issue. Third point, tension pneumothorax that can happen due to many reasons. So I am not highlighting those reasons, but yes, tension pneumothorax is the final outcome, and we do not want my patient to land in severe hypotension and finally death. massive hemothorax. So these are the things, emergency conditions I do not want to miss. I have to address and I have to treat these conditions first. Now, look for general signs of respiratory distress, like my patient is sweating profusely. Patient has already landed in the central cyanosis, already described in the previous slide. Use of accessory muscles of respiration, or paradoxical breathing or abdominal breathing. That is not normal breathing. Normal is thoracico-abdominal or thoracic breathing. So if your patient is having abdominal breathing, maybe there is some problem I need to address immediately before the patient loses the airway and goes into severe hypoxia. For the breathing part, how will you assess? You have diagnosed that my patient is right now having breathing problem. So now you will, how will you assess, and then you will treat. Now for the assessment part, expose the chest. You see whether the both the the lungs and the both sides of the chest are expanding properly or not. Assess the rate and depth. Sometimes the rate may be normal, but the depth is abnormally high. So that also you need to understand. Then auscultate the breath sounds. But here again, I want to highlight, in the COVID pandemic, auscultation is a big no in our suspected COVID patients or the COVID who are positive. So there are other methods to auscultate, or maybe the finding there is some problem in the breathing part. Then auscultate heart sound. Inspect for bilateral chest wall movement or any other deformity. So that thing you can just do at the bedside in maybe 30 seconds or 1 minute. You can just look at and then find some problem is there. Now, palpate the chest for any other abnormalities. If there is some fracture, some crepitus, some abnormal sound, some wound, some hole is there, some oozing is from some side, that you can easily do at the bedside. And then anticipate use of advanced airway or airway adjuncts to support breathing. We know, so just you have to again assess and use it. Then continuously monitor the oxygenation status in your patient. So these are the things what you can do in the breathing part. Now comes to the question number 2. Dr. Saurabh, please.
So which of the following is not a sign of respiratory distress? So we've covered airway and breathing. So which of the following is not a sign of respiratory distress? Central cyanosis, use of accessory muscles, nasal flaring, or respiratory rate of 16 per minute. So again, giving you 15-20 seconds to put your answers in the chat box. So most of you have written the correct answer. It's the respiratory rate of 16 per minute. So the normal respiratory rate is between 12 to 16 per minute. And all the others are signs of respiratory distress. Central cyanosis, use of accessory muscles, paradoxical respiration, nasal flaring, use of sternofluidomastoids. So these all tell you that the patient is the person is respiratory distress. So respiratory rate of 16 is normal. And if the patient is having tachypnea of around 25 to 30, that means in respiratory distress. So by ruling out, we can use the answer as answer D. Always remember to see the not in the question. Yeah, all of you have done well. Over to Tapas.
So after this very thought-provoking question, but very easy question. Now coming to the C part, that is circulation. Consider hypovolemia to be the primary cause of shock until proven otherwise. So for the beginners, for the nurses, and for the junior doctors, just considering some abnormal and rare diagnosis that patient is having cardiogenic shock, patient is having obstructive shock, will actually lose precious time. So first and foremost thing at the bedside, what you can do and you can rectify well, that is hypovolemic shock. That you need to understand. And for that, you have to assess the patient's color of the hands and digits. Are they blue, pink, pale, or mottled? Then you also assess the limb temperature just by putting your the hand there, touching the patient's hand. Are they cool or warm? Now, simple thing, count the patient's pulse rate. If the monitor has not been attached, you are in the ward, maybe it will take some time. Maybe immediately just counting the patient's pulse rate, you can like get to know so many important things just by whether it is bounding pulse, whether it is thready pulse, or there is arrhythmias, the patient is having irregular pulse. So the diagnosis also can be made to certain extent by just counting the patient's pulse rate for the circulation part or the cardiac cause. Now, measure the capillary refill time, though hardly we are using capillary refill time in the current scenario, but you need to understand the concept and the physiology behind capillary refill time. Palpate all the peripheral and central pulses for assessing the rate, quality, regularity, and equality. And you need to understand also, if your like pulses are low volume, palpable, that means poor cardiac output. While a bounding pulse may indicate the most common diagnosis what we like do at the bedside in a critical care unit, that is sepsis or septic shock. So that we need to understand low volume, high volume, or bounding pulse. Now, after this, you have to measure the patient's blood pressure. A low diastolic blood pressure, we all know that can happen due to anaphylactic shock or sepsis. And the reason behind is arterial vasodilation. And the arterial vasodilation can result in low diastolic blood pressure. Now, if you get to know the pulse pressure, which is the difference between systolic and diastolic blood pressure, and if it is narrowed, that means normal is 35 to 45, but if it is right now 10 or maybe 15, something like that, so it suggests that you are dealing with a patient who is having arterial vasoconstriction due to cardiogenic shock or hypovolemia. So these are the things in the circulation part. Auscultate the heart, look for other signs of poor cardiac output. And the most important thing at the bedside, what you can do, just check the level of consciousness in the patient. If the patient is conscious enough, that means the cerebral circulation is very well maintained. That will exclude most of the abnormalities or most of the major things what you are actually right now targeting. Then the third point, what you can do at the bedside immediately, by just measuring the urine volume. If it is less than 0.5 ml per hour in last 1 or 2 hours, something like that, that means definitely the patient is landing in poor renal perfusion. So that you can, and then you can immediately try to rectify that. Then try to examine the patient thoroughly for any external hemorrhage. If there is history suggestive and your patient is right now having hypotension, try to exclude some external hemorrhage from the wounds or drains or some concealed hemorrhage. Like if the history is suggestive of some intraperitoneal bleed or some gut bleed or some thoracic bleed, so you can also try to exclude those regions if in your patient, if you are not getting very obvious cause for the hypotension or the circulation problems. For the circulation, what you can do, obtain baseline data, and you can just measure intake output in the last 8 to 12 hours. Never ever believe in the 24 hours data in a critical ill patient. You have to also, along with the 24-hour data, maybe you can also ask the relatives, or like if you are at the bedside, last 2 hours what is happening. Maybe the 24-hour urine output will be 1500 ml, but last 2 hours the patient has started dipping the urine output, and that are the clues what is right now the patient is giving you some time. If you are missing those signs, then you will be landing that after 2 hours the patient will land in total complete anuria and the renal perfusion is totally shut down. Anticipate fluid resuscitation at the earliest. If you are thinking the patient needs fluid, do not wait. Try to start fluid resuscitation at the earliest. Now, keep all peripheral IV catheters, keep isotonic IV fluids. Then, related to the circulation itself, just one immediate questions we are having. Dr. Saurabh, please.
All of the following are signs of poor peripheral perfusion, except A, decrease in the level of consciousness, B, decrease in urine output, C, cold clammy extremities, and D, decrease in capillary refill time. So this is a question related to circulation, and please put in your answers in the chat box. Please try and participate. That will tell you whether you've understood the previous slides or not. Some more answers, please. Yeah. So again, most of you are correct. The answer is decrease in capillary refill time. So if the perfusion is poor, there will be an increase in the capillary refill time, not a decrease in the capillary refill time. Over to Dr. Tapas.
So the normal capillary refill time, though we are not doing it regularly at the bedside, 3 to 5 seconds. So if it is like no increased in these circumstances, maybe you have to like diagnose that maybe you are having a poor peripheral perfusion. Now coming to the D part, disability or neurologic evaluation. Assess the neurologic status by GCS. We all know, assess the pupils. It's not only about the size, also you have to check the equality, whether they are reactive or not. Then anticipate airway protection or intubation and ventilation. If GCS is more or less than 8, but it is not always a rule that if GCS is less than 8, you will immediately intubate. Depends upon the clinical decision. Now, common causes of unconsciousness along with hypoxemia. It can also be due to hypercapnia when the CO2 level is very high, cerebral hypoperfusion, or recent administration of sedatives and analgesics. So also you have to know about the drug history from the previous hospital or from the ward nurse. You need to understand. Then just don't label that the patient is having hypoxia and I will immediately intubate. No. Measure the blood glucose. That is the first thing. I know everybody knows this concept, that hypoglycemia you have to rule out first for any patient coming with unconsciousness, because hypoglycemia you can reverse immediately with just simple maneuver. Now question number 4 related to unconsciousness. Dr. Saurabh.
So what are the common causes of unconsciousness? Hypoxemia, hypercapnia, hypoglycemia, or all of the above? Please put in your answers in the chat box. So the idea is to remember that hypoglycemia is a very common mimic of unconsciousness. And as soon as the person or the patient walks into you and if he feels that he's unconscious, just check a blood sugar level. That is an easy thing to reverse and bring the patient back to consciousness. The answer is all of the above, D.
Okay. Now coming to the E part, I have already told you have to assess from head to toe by fully exposing and undressing the patient, but it is written very clearly in a red letters, maintain privacy and prevent heat loss. You cannot just do like with the high voltage your emotions, you try to expose it without maintaining the privacy part. Yes. If there is hypothermia, cover up using the resources available in hand. And if there is hyperthermia, start initiating surface cooling techniques along with therapeutic intervention. Now, coming to the E part again, I will also tell about this is examination. Take a full clinical history from the patient, relatives, friends, or other staff. So, along with the exposure or environmental control, you can also do examination at this time. Review the patient's previous notes. If the patient has been discharged from some other hospital, you can go through the discharge summary, the charts. Most of the things will be obvious to you. What are the problems right now in front of me? Study both absolute as well as trended values of vital sign. It is not one parameter or one vital chart which is right now deciding the diagnosis. You have to know the trend and check the important routine medications that are prescribed and being administered. So that gives you a complete thorough like your control over the patient. Now review the results of laboratory and radiologic investigation, and also if you are in the emergency department or in the critical care the patient has received by you, you can also thought like the thought will come to your mind that whether this patient requires high dependency unit or critical care unit, which is medical or surgical ICU, and utmost care during transport of critically ill patients. That also is very important for a nurse. The transport critical care is very important. And then you have to also think about definitive treatment of the patient's underlying condition after or in consultation with the doctor itself. Now, the second part of my presentation is ongoing or daily assessment of critically ill patients. So once the patient is stabilized, you have assessed the patient in your critical care unit or in the emergency department. Now, second day when you are coming to review or take handover from your relieving nurse, what you should do. So a formula which again we all know, first hug BIDS. That means you give a big bear hug for your patient. Believe me, most of the things, if you are doing like this, things are becoming pretty easy for you. Like first for feeding, analgesia, sedation, thromboprophylaxis. Then hug means just 1 second. Slide. Yeah. Head elevation, stress ulcer prophylaxis, glycemic control, bowel and bladder. You can just have this in your mind. Invasive lines, de-escalation of antimicrobials, and then S for spontaneous breathing trial. So these are the things what you can do at the bedside. Now coming to the feeding part, I will not go into detail because it's a very vast topic. You have to assess the nutritional status of your patient. Try to initiate feeding within 24 hours of your ICU admission. That can be in the form of enteral, parenteral, total parenteral, partial parenteral. So that depends upon the clinical condition and doctor who is assessing the patient. Enteral feeding, you need to verify the tube placement. You have to observe for abdominal distension, pain and discomfort prior to giving feeding, and also elevation of your head end to at least 30 degree is very important when you are assessing these patients regularly in your shift duties. Bowel sound is a misnomer because it's not an indication to start or stop the feeding. And check for delayed gastric emptying. So that are the things what you can do for the feeding part. Parenteral feeding, you have to assess whether you can give it easily through peripheral line or central line. And if you are giving it through peripheral or central line, assess that the site is not infected. Very important. Coming to the analgesia part, we need to understand the pain assessment scales. We need to chart it properly, and we need to also know the various scales what you can do at the bedside, like visual analog scale. Most reliably, patient self-report. If the patient is complaining to you because of the pain, that means we need to act very urgently for the pain relief. Coming to the sedation part, we know so many sedative agents, what we should do, what we should administer to your patient. But remember, sedation holiday is a very important concept in the critical care unit. Depending upon your doctor's advice, try to give sedation holiday to your patient every day. The nursing considerations are there for the sedation holiday. You need to have a vigilance that there should not be any pulling of the tube or invasive lines during the sedation holiday. Committing the thromboprophylaxis, everybody knows the importance. What are the agents we should use for thromboprophylaxis? It can be non-pharmacologic, pharmacologic. So you need to understand the thromboprophylaxis part and the role of it. Coming to the head elevation, we need to know what are the importance and what are the role of head elevation in our critical ill patient. And then ulcer prophylaxis, again glycemic control, you need to have a very robust the glycemic control in your patient. It cannot be intensive or very strict glycemic control in medical ICU, but definitely you should avoid extreme fluctuation of blood glucose in your patient. You can have your insulin infusion protocol, which you can adopt in your patient depending upon the doctor's advice. Bowel and bladder, very important thing. You need to understand, you need to ask the patient, you need to take the bowel and bladder care properly. Invasive lines, there may be so many invasive lines starting from the peripheral line, the Foley catheter, then the endotracheal tube, intercostal chest drain, but you need to know that whether my patient can be taken out of these invasive lines. De-escalation or escalation of antibiotic, both the things you as a bedside nurse also can take the initiative, discuss with the doctor depending upon the clinical condition and take a decision. Spontaneous breathing trial, as a nurse also, you can also discuss with the physiotherapist, respiratory therapist, and the doctor, so that the spontaneous breathing trial can be given adequately and in the right time, so that the weaning from the ventilation can be easily instituted. Now, coming to the question number 5, Dr. Saurabh.
Which of the following should be assessed daily in the ICU? You just had a beautiful mnemonic shown by Dr. Tapas. So just remember the mnemonic and answer the question. Which of the following should be assessed daily in the ICU? Feeding and glycemic control, sedation and analgesia, stress ulcer prophylaxis, thromboprophylaxis, or all of the above? Great. That means all of you are very attentive. The answer is E, all of the above, and all of these can be remembered by the mnemonic FAST, HUGS, BID. Okay. Yeah. Okay,
Very
Dr.
well
Tapas.
done. Now, what are the other measures? We can assess the critical ill patient by looking at the skin condition by use of Braden scale, the false risk assessment, laboratory parameters regularly, and importance of time. Because time is very precious. We cannot lose the time by waiting for the reports. If the patient is seriously ill, we can directly call the microbiology department or the lab, so that we can get the reports at the earliest, and we can institute the treatment or intervention part also at the earliest. Now, again, last question, question number 6.
So, which of the following is not true about the GCS? A, the full form is Glasgow Coma Scale. B, maximum score is 15. C, minimum score is 0. D, it has 3 components, that is eye response, verbal response, and motor response. So I like all of you to participate and put your answers. This, I think all of you should do 100% correct. Very well. All of you did it very well. All is 100% correct. So the answer is minimum score is Z. That is a wrong statement. The minimum score is 3. Score ranges from 3 to 15. There are 3 components: eye response, verbal response, and motor response. So the maximum for eye response is, the score is from 1 to 4. Verbal response, the score is from 1 to 5. And motor response, the score is from 1 to 6. Hence the minimum score is 3 and the maximum is 15. What do you, Dr. Tapas?
So it's just not to check your the patient's GCS, but your all GCS. So your all GCS is right now intact, and it's all 15 by 15. Now, finally, I will not try to make it very complicated. So with few last slides will be paying attention to small details. It's just like looking under a microscope. So we have to be very attentive not to miss simple things at the bedside, so that we can give our best effort to cure the patient. And finally, maybe if your hospital or your ICU is having a checklist are not the complete answer to our problems, but checklists actually protect against the difficulty in a complex environment. And we all agree critical care is a very high voltage dynamic area. So sometimes due to the stress of the situation, we may forget a step in the process. So if we are having a checklist at the bedside, we can do most of the things in a complex environment in a systematic manner and within short span of time also. So the advantages of a checklist: not to forget a step in the process, not to have distraction, and deliberately skipping of a step since it probably doesn't matter. So sometimes, most of the time also, I will say, and Dr. Saurabh will also agree with me, sometimes we are not paying attention to these fast talk BIDs in a very systematic way. But there are simple things. If we'll just ask the nurse, or all of us also check at the bedside fast talk BIDs regularly, we will get most of the things in our patient from the basic critical care angle. What do you say, Dr. Saurabh?
Yes, truly. So when we were students, fast talk bits came and it was really expanded. So initially we used to write in the notebook to remember that we are checking all of this in the patients, and slowly it becomes a mental process. And then it prevents any small mistakes, and we keep in the mind everything, and the patient is finally better. So it's all very important.
Yes. And we can have some like no checklist have explicit reminders of the necessary steps in a process. If it is a complicated like data, so we need not know everything to be like at the bedside. Maybe we can check the list and we can immediately act at the bedside. Provide verification and provides a discipline that drives higher performance at the very bedside, which is the patient is dipping in front of us. So finally, we are all geniuses. I will not say we are not, we are intellectuals, because intellectuals solve the problems, and we as the healthcare workers, and we as the perfect healthcare workers, we have to prevent them from occurring. So that is as per Albert Einstein also. And also I will quote this in the context of this critical care services, that we should prevent the problems to like happen. That should be our attitude. Finally, with this I will like end of my discussion. I hope I try to cover up most of the things in a very easy and lucid manner, and I hope you all liked it. If you have any problem related to this initial assessment or the nursing care, how to do it at the bedside, we are always there to help you. Thank you all. Please take care and stay safe. And Dr. Saurav, if you have any questions, or if you can just have some
So
advice
I
to the.
would request all the participants to either raise hands or unmute and ask the questions, or you can put them in the chat box. Okay, this is from the ISCCM to the panelists. That YouTube link to the previous step and recorded lecture is available. So please kindly note it down and copy it. All of you, please. Any questions related to this topic? I think 3 participants have raised hand. They can unmute themselves and can ask questions. We are perfectly okay with it.
You can all post it in the chat box, the question. Miss Purabi Garima Devi, yeah, you can post it in the chat box. Dr. Naveen Kumar Neeraj.
Please post your question in the chat box. We'll answer them to the best of our abilities.
Miss Sweetie, yeah, you can also post your query in the chat box. Or else you can share your questions. We can just try to like always mention it in your like emails. If you can share your emails also, if you can share your questions also, if you don't want to share here.
So till the time the questions are coming, I just wanted to thank the nurses for their contribution in the critically ill patients. It's a tremendous contribution, and it's not always given their due. It ranges from meticulous observation, skilled interventions in providing basic hygiene, nutrition, antibiotics, and prevention of any harm. And besides that, they provide invaluable emotional and psychological support, both to the patients and their families. So thank you to all the nurses of all the fields, actually. We haven't received any questions in the chat box till now.
So if there are no questions, then maybe we can wind up.
You can post the questions by the mail, and me and Dr. Tapas will try to answer them, if that is okay. Dr. Path, I think there is no questions. Please share your email ID.
Okay, we'll share you our email ID here. Just 1 second. Dr. Saurabh, you can also share it.
Yeah, I'll type mine.
Yeah.
So there are few questions that are coming. Good. So first one is parental nutrition adequate to make the patient's daily requirements? Dr. Path, would you like to take it or I'll tell?
You can share your view.
Yeah. So the preference is nowadays towards enteral nutrition. So we have to meet the daily caloric nutrition, daily goals, daily protein requirements. But as of now, as much as possible, we should use enteral nutrition to meet the daily requirements. If we are unable to meet the requirements within a period of 4 to 7 days, we can supplement it by parental nutrition. So that is the primary role of parental nutrition in most critically ill patients. There will always be a subset of patients in which you cannot feed them entirely, or they are nutritionally weak when they come to you in the critical care department or the ICUs. So in those patients, you can opt for parental nutrition slightly early to meet their calorie requirements and the protein requirements. Dr. Tapas, your views?
Yeah. So very nicely described about the role of enteral and parenteral. If you can use enteral, always enteral is the preference. But yes, if certain conditions when we are unable to meet the daily requirement, or we need to add partial parenteral nutrition along with the enteral nutrition, definitely. But your question is it adequate to make the patient daily requirement? Yes, if we prepare, or you can advise the parenteral nutrition, so that is named as total parenteral nutrition. The maximum target will be to achieve the calorie as well as the protein and as well as the repeat requirement, but that depends upon the always the nutritional assessment on a daily basis. Yeah.
So another question that has come up is, which ICU can we call a real ICU? So real ICU is a terminology heard by me also for the first time. So we call them open ICU or a closed ICU, then semi-open and semi-closed. But I didn't get exactly the question, Dr. Navdeep, what we call a real ICU. So it depends who is the primary physician who is managing the ICU, whether we have references that can be taken from outside. So on that basis, we define them as a closed ICU or an open ICU. And usually most of the ICUs are semi-closed or semi-open, depending on how much input we are taking from other departments, other units, and whether it's a single decision making or a joint decision making. Dr. Navdeep, can you tell me exactly what you mean by real ICU?
Maybe he was trying to emphasize on virtual ICU. Maybe one is real ICU,
okay.
one is virtual ICU. Yeah.
Yeah, quite possible. Yeah. So nowadays, tele ICU, virtual ICUs are in vogue, and they actually, in our country, is a very useful thing, so that we can reach to all the areas in our country in a much better manner.